Hello and welcome to a new video. So this is the first in a new fitness series focusing on two things. One, my 2025 fitness journey, where I'm trying to get my levels of fitness back that I used to have, while also working out the best ways to train to wear power armour, i.e. exosuits, exoskeletons, whatever you want to call them. As to wear one and use it effectively, I don't think it's a regular type of fitness. I don't think it's just running or CrossFit or weight training. I think it's a mix of each one in certain different areas, and perhaps areas where nobody really trains these days. And we're going to start out with a shoulder day, and then we'll go over a little bit of diet and then my fitness and physique at the minute, just so we can track progress as the series goes on. So let's get on over to the gym/workout area and get started. To start off, we're going to warm up with some simple overhead pressing with just a fairly light barbell. I think it's 35 kilos. Warm up being the key word here because this gym is on the yard that I work on, which is pretty good because it's quiet, but it does mean that it's basically not worth them heating. So it is pretty damn cold in winter. And I'm going to take this moment to ask you to like and subscribe if you don't mind. That way, one day with some ad revenue, I can get a new coat. I just went in for 3 sets of this. I think it was between about 12 and 20 reps. And I don't know about any of you guys, but I always feel like going behind the head, certainly to warm up, always feels a bit friendlier on the shoulders. Now I'm slightly warmed up, I can get the 15-year-old coat off and start with the cleans and push presses. This is, to me, at least in my opinion, where the functional part of all this comes in. In my opinion, doing the clean up to your shoulders, but then doing a push press instead of a jerk is a lot more functional strength, as you're still relying on your actual triceps and your shoulders doing something, but you've had to have the core strength and a degree of explosive ability to actually get it up there in the first place. Also, while I do want the kind of brew isolated muscle strength that bodybuilding training does get you, which I actually think is underrated, I do of course want to be able to move my body in unison and not end up like a rigid robot. So doing these big full body compound exercises, in my opinion, are great for that, as I'm sure most of you will agree. Unfortunately, in this gym, we do lack 10 kilo bumper plates at the minute. So I've had to start off at 60 kilos, not that big of a deal. However, I haven't done this for a while, so it's a question of do I see stars or not as I go up in weight. As it's my first time back in the gym training properly again for a while, I'll just be doing 60, 70, 75, and then I'll be trying 80 kilos as well. Another reason for doing this exercise this way, minus the bad form, bear with me, I'm just coming back, is because I want to do holds and practice actually doing the hold at the top and get better at that. This is something I started doing more of at one point because I realised that basically while I was strong and actually getting up the weight, I wanted to drop it after about 5 seconds. Back when I was hating my life as a HGV mechanic, I do remember once lifting a prop shaft up onto a truck with another mechanic who used to be in the army, and he could just hold that prop shaft above his head forever. Even though it wasn't particularly strong, I was a decent amount stronger than him on actual pushing. But when it come to holding something above his head, he could just do that for however long he wanted. He was the go-to guy to lift something and hold something above your head for, whether that was a prop shaft on a truck or a van gearbox. That's when I realised that holding the weight that you've just lifted for however long you need to lift it is probably one of the most functional things you can have when it comes to strength, and also one of the least valued parts of strength and least trained for. Hence why you'll notice at the end of some of the sets, I'll hold the weight at the top, and sometimes with my arms a little bit bent to really try train that holding strength. And what do you know, that brings us nicely up to the 80 kilo attempt. The question is, do I succeed in the rep or do I just see stars and then walk off in shame? You guessed it, the recent months of living off Tesco meal deals weren't quite enough to get it done. But we'll try again next time. For now, I'm just going to get a few more of the 80 kilo cleans in. At least you could probably tell by now, this won't be some interesting but also slightly depressing Larry Wheels or Eddie Hall video where they lift monstrous amounts of weight you will never dream of. I can assure with my remarkably average genetics, anything I get up to in this series is attainable to pretty much all. And I'm finishing the exercise off with a 60 kilo hold. This is also something that I think is relevant to wearing a form of exosuit or power armour in the future, providing the actuators work as they do now. That's because a lot of the actuators they use are quasi-direct drive brushless motors, which are great, but if they're holding position, i.e. torque holding, and holding that position under heavy load, they do heat up very quickly. So it would actually be advantageous for any user to basically have a great holding strength to assist the suit with, instead of basically relying on the actuators of the suit to do all of the work without burning out. This isn't an issue in motion or under light loads. It's the fact that to hold position, they typically hold on one of the phases of the motor, which basically means they have to put a lot of current down one of the phases for the electromagnets, which heats up rapidly, which can then melt the enamel coating off the copper wire and then cause the whole thing to short out.
While I was explaining that, you can probably tell we've moved on to a bit of a front delt raise. Lifting a plate above your head and rotating it left and right. I do try to alternate between different sets which way I turn it first, just to make sure that shoulder movement is equal on both sides. Typically do 3 sets of this, which is enough for you to see how tight this t-shirt is starting to get around my waist. The hardest part about this next exercise is to actually remember to do it, but it's certainly worth doing as it works your interior delt and I believe a bit of your rear delt as well. 2 muscle groups that are typically well ignored, including by myself. If I remember rightly, it is also pretty good for your posture as it basically allows your front delts to stretch outwards a bit, as well as pulling your scapula in at the back, all aiding in reducing the arch in your upper back, providing you do it regularly, of course. Normally, I'd go in for about 3 to 5 sets of this, 12 to 15 reps per set. Moving on to the Arnold dumbbell press or one-arm dumbbell press. An exercise that I used to quite like as it's that big compound movement. It does require a lot of strength, but there's actually quite a lot of technique and balance to it. Although I have to say my technique isn't particularly great here, I do kind of feel out of sync with my body and techniques like this because I haven't been to the gym as hard as I used to do. But this exercise is something I want to improve on for a particular reason, and that is because my left hand is nowhere near as good as my right hand. So a couple of years ago, I ended up in ICU, and one of the injuries amongst many was that I fractured my left wrist, but then I ended up having delirium as part of having brain trauma from brain swelling and so on and so on. And in that delirium, I basically started to smash that hand up because it turns out when you've got brain trauma, things like broken wrists don't really matter. This all meant that the fracture in my radius turned into a full break where it also got partially rotated round, and these small bones in my hand started to get dislocated as all of the hand started to move over, out of place. This did then get operated on. All of the bones in my hand were pulled as straight as possible. The bone rotated and then a titanium plate put in to bolt it back together. It's recovered pretty well, but as you can imagine, it's not 100%. So when it comes to grip strength and holding things in certain positions, it's just not as good as the right. And doing this dumbbell press is one of the things it struggles on. Hence why I can do the press with 40 kilos in my right arm, but I'm struggling to do it past 24, 26 kilos in my left arm. So definitely something to work on in the future and see the progress through time. But in the meantime, we'll get onto the last 2 shoulder exercises, some standard lat raises, and then just some lightweight barbell shoulder pressing to burn out with. I've always liked to go in for, say, 3 to 5 sets on the lat raises, not particularly going heavy. And then on the barbell press, it does depend on fatigue, but I'll typically try to do 25 reps per set. Do 3 to 5 sets, something like that, maybe 25 kilos for the barbell. And that brings us on to the tricep exercises. I've just had a thought, is this tricep pushdown on a bar? I don't think I've ever actually called it anything. But as I'm thoroughly warmed up, I do like to go heavy to start off with. Even if you do have to sacrifice some form to get the reps out, this is the kind of strength I want to make sure I have, just pure muscle strength. It's also an exercise that I've always, to be honest, quite enjoyed. I also intend on adding some weighted dips into the tricep routine in the future, which surprisingly is something that wraps back around to the powered armoured exoskeleton project, in that while, at least for my design, all the actuators will work sufficiently so the armour is weightless on the user, when it comes to actually lifting yourself up like in a dip position or a pull-up position, the arm actuators, for example, won't be sufficient to pull the entire weight of the suit up. So to do things like that, the wearer will have to be strong enough to handle the extra weight. That's not something that can't be done, it just requires some training to do so. Now that's 3 sets of the bar done, we'll go on to the old rope. Always a great finisher, and if I remember rightly, I did about 3 sets medium weight and then commenced with the superset, which actually gives me time to ask a couple of questions for you to respond to in the comments. One being, for those that go to the gym, what is your favourite tricep exercise? What do you think gets the best burn nowadays? It used to be this stuff for me, but I'm always wondering if there's something new that I can try. And the second one is, how long do you all like YouTube videos these days? I feel like in general 15 minutes is a good time, 20 minutes is alright, depending on what it is. Sometimes I think 25 minutes can be a bit too much because they can be long drawn out but not necessarily fulfill a storyline. Whereas if it's actually an hour long, you can at least get a storyline and story arc built into it. So what do all you guys think? I have to say I did enjoy this workout. It was good to be back and really try to put effort in again, even though I'm certainly fatiguing a lot quicker than I used to do. And my main critique, particularly of this exercise, is my body staying nowhere near still enough to properly isolate my triceps. But that is something I'll be able to work on next time, especially as I'm now recording this for the channel. I think in total the superset was about 10 reps, and that about brings us to the end of the workout. So I'll stretch off in my imagination and then take the journey home. That way I can touch on macros and then talk about the shame of the current physique.
And that brings us to the end of workout numero uno, particularly for shoulders. I do have some more things I want to add to the shoulder workout, namely sledgehammering a tyre and some handstand balancing and pressing. As well as, of course, re-improving my form, particularly on those cleans and overhead presses. As for the diet, I don't completely have the macros nailed down to a T yet, but I'm going to be looking at about 200 to 220 grams of protein a day and between 60 to 80 grams of fat. As for carbohydrates, this is something that I always found was best to vary depending on what I've done during the day, because I've always worked in physical jobs. The amount of calories that I burn and need per day differed quite a lot. So I always found it better to have that as the variable number and go off what I think. I like to think from the workout you can still see how I've got some strength, and I'm certainly not starting from zero, but nevertheless we will take a look at the shame of the current physique so I can track future progress and see how it started.
And here you can see a slow but sure decline of physical fitness. A decline aided on by the power of sausage rolls, jam tarts and Greg's steak bakes. And if you're an American listening to this, just know that is the finest of British cuisines. Along with Frey Bentos pies, of course. But on a slightly more serious note, you can kind of see from this video that I did once have a decent amount of muscle, a decent physique, at least in my opinion. And now I kind of just look semi-deflated, kind of like a 3-day-old helium balloon. The only real working out I've done for the last few months has basically been press-ups and some resistance band work. This, of course, does mean that leg day is basically skipped every day, as you can tell. Something that I'll start to get back on the next video. My current goal is to get back to my old physique, which I'll put the measurements for in the next video. I don't think it's going to be too hard as long as I'm basically dedicated for like 2 or 3 months. I wasn't crazy big or crazy lean. I was just at a good weight, looked good, and crucially, I performed really well in all areas. One thing I would like to try and improve on in this time is actually my running. I got up to running a decent distance, but I was never a good runner, and I was then going to try and get my times down. So that is something I'd like to improve on over my old physique as well. With that said, back to the studio / next room.
So the next video I think is going to be legs / cardio, weather depending, because if it snows bad, where I want to go really isn't good. But other than that, I hope you enjoyed the video. To any regular viewers, I hope you didn't mind the slight change in content on this video. I originally started this channel just to really post about the stuff I was making. However, filming this, I did actually quite enjoy it because it gave me something to focus my mind on while working out, as typically I'm trying to think of something else, whereas now I was thinking of working out and doing the actual video. And as the ever hungry YouTube algorithm requires more videos than ever, I'll probably be doing a lot more of this type of stuff, because frankly, I can only really build one thing a week. I tried to build 2 things a week at one point and just couldn't get them out. So I hope you'll stick around for these videos too. With that being said, I hope you have a good day and a great week, and I hope to see you on the next video.